ugly pumpkin! Go back there and get it for me!
Okay, let's just get into this video. No introduction other than an autistic version of Sideswipe from Robots in Disguise 2015, talking about how bad Among Us is or something, I don't know.
You're so sussy!
Hey everyone, Roadbreach here, and today we're responding to Netherless. Now you may be wondering, didn't he help you when you were getting slandered? Yes, he did do that. But that's not a shield for criticism, especially since he makes several disingenuous arguments throughout this video.
It's kind of ironic when you state disingenuous arguments when we get into the nitty-gritty of this. Just you wait.
Netherless decided to respond to my Among Us review that I made out of spite because I was sick and tired of people singing this game's praises for reasons I'll get into as we get through the video.
Already we see that it's not really your right to call something quote-unquote disingenuous when you make a video out of spite, rather than with intentions to validly critique.
Anyway, let's do this.
And today, we are going to be responding to a video from 3 years ago that is a completely horrendous review of the critically acclaimed party game, Among Us.
Okay, I was going to skip further, but I think this statement is kinda ironic. He brings up the fact that the game is critically acclaimed when he criticized me in the past for bringing up critic scores in my ex-Lucas rant. Didn't we agree that critic scores mean nothing when The Last of Us 2 got Game of the Year?
So he can play as Abby.
So why do critic scores matter now? Oh, right, it's out of spite.
Well, the thing is that Among Us is critically acclaimed between both critics and actual players of the game itself. Compared to something like The Last of Us Part 2, which was only critically acclaimed by critics, Among Us received relatively high praise from the perspective of both sides of the gaming scene. It's not even out of spite either, considering that most of your critiques consist of nothing but what you think would be better for the game itself, with no consideration with what the developers are going for here.
Among Us was developed by Innersloth and published by Tom Brow and was released on November 16th, 2018.
We're off to a phenomenal start with Roadbreach using completely unnecessary ear rape. I had to literally turn down the volume on that part because of how loud it was, just to put into perspective how unnecessarily loud that was. There is no punchline to the ear rape either. It's just him complaining about how, despite the fact Among Us came out in 2018, it gained massive popularity in 2020. And the biggest factor on why Among Us blew up so much in that year is mainly because of the pandemic that year. So yes, Roadbreach is clearly just bitching in this clip for the sake of bitching.
Playing a game where you walk around playing the same shallow selection of minigames ad infinitum in one of the worst years in recorded history sounds like adding insult to injury. Of all the things you could do to keep yourself busy, you choose the video game equivalent of this meme.
Again, I love repetition!
Yeah, honestly, you really shouldn't try to be funny with memes when they don't even bring your point across that well.
Besides, it's not like there was a drought of multiplayer games to play that year.
There wasn't a drought of multiplayer games. The entire purpose of Among Us is to be a simple party game that can be played a lot with a friend, or on the go, or in your room. It's one of the major appeals of Among Us as it bears a striking resemblance to some of the game modes like Trouble in Terrorist Town from Gmod. It's literally one of those types of games that evoke the vibes of playing very casually in a murder mystery. As a result, when there's unfortunately a slow of attempts to make every multiplayer game a hardcore competitive slotfest, Among Us brings a smell of fresh air into the multiplayer genre.
On PC and mobile. This game has been popping up everywhere on social media, with tons of memes, fan art, and fan songs. I've avoided this game for a long time, and personally, I'm sick and tired of seeing it. It just looks like an unremarkable version of Club Penguin.
Bro is really comparing Among Us to Club Penguin? Why? Those are two completely different games from one another. One game is where people went around to socialize with others and play mini-games with them. The other is a murder mystery. They are not comparable in the slightest. Even if you were talking about the aesthetics, they don't match in any capacity.
A good point. Taking a look at a screenshot from Club Penguin and Among Us, we can see that Club Penguin uses black outlines prior to its update, whereas Among Us uses colored outlines. That being said, Club Penguin still looks better due to the fact that the characters have an adequate amount of detail.
Dumbass!
That's a really null point when you consider that the crewmates in Among Us are intentionally meant to be highly simplistic because it was meant to have a decent silhouette in gameplay alongside evoking the more old Newgrounds era of Flash games. Criticizing Among Us for being too simplistic is the equivalent of criticizing Modern Warfare 2019 for having too many realistic guns. It removes the context of the developer's intentions and only exists to fuel the rage of pseudo-intellectuals who think that everything they believe would improve something is superior to what the developer is intending, which makes it worse because the developers are clearly intending something with a a goal in mind.
with its cheap-ass presentation.
Cheap-ass presentation, as if Among Us was supposed to look pretty in the first place. Boo-hoo, they went with an incredibly simplistic art style, the same type of art style you'd see in the Henry Stickmin games. Which makes sense because both Among Us and Henry Stickmin were made by the same people. What, you want Among Us to have beautiful graphics and the likes of Death Stranding or something? Give me a break.
No, what I want is an adequate amount of detail, and for people to stop spamming these hideous backpack cunts anywhere and everywhere. Nobody besides you wants to fuck backpacks, I guarantee that.
I'm sorry. What?
Also, I don't give a fuck how pretty Death Stranding looks when you spend most of the damn thing walking around. I'd prefer to actually do something while I'm moving, thank you very much.
My brother in Christ! You don't have to project on how much you want to have sexual relations with the backpack from Dora the Explorer. I bet Roadbreach over here is just all like, backpack, backpack, oh backpack, backpack! In all seriousness though, where the fuck was the spam of the Among Us crewmates outside of memes and the Among Us content itself? Even if it did exist, you could just, fucking ignore it if you wanted. Also, fuck up with the entire, adequate amount of detail bullshit, because you can already tell that the crewmates resemble some form of heavily simplified astronaut. But hey, I guess Roadbreach has the logic of your average culture warrior, where if it's not fetish material for crappy minorities of people who care too much about minuscule details, then I guess it's bad because reasons.
But I've decided to play it for myself. After all, you don't judge a book by its cover, and you shouldn't judge a game by its graphics. So, how does this game hold up? Well, let's suit up and see what this game has to offer. Right off the bat, this game's graphics are unappealing.
Roadbreach, you just said you shouldn't judge a game by its graphics, yet here you are, judging the game by its graphics. And graphics isn't even the right term for it, it's just the art style of the game.
That's how my review format works. I start with the most obvious aspect of whatever I cover, and then I get into what isn't obvious upon first glance. And the art style for Among Us is dog shit.
You constantly state about how Among Us's art style is dog shit without going into the reason into why it's dog shit. It kinda shows that you have really jack shit to say about the art style itself.
And bro, look, I really don't think you should be a judge of a game's aesthetics when you make incredibly bad drawings like this and that.
Good here, Latch. That's my sweet prince.
Imagine a game that looks like this. That would be visually unappealing.
It's funny you think I'm going to take your advice here. I'll judge the aesthetics of whatever I please. It's also hypocritical that you say the game looks fine, but then turn around and call my art style unappealing. And your copium in the comments is pretty pathetic too.
At 4:56 he says, well, he denigrates my art because nothing should be anthro. You think this is a gotcha when the point was you think Among Us's art style is shit when you make degenerate furry drawings. Well, it's your opinion, but you state it as fact. You can't say, "Ooh, that's your opinion," but then call my art bad as fact. That's hypocrisy. It doesn't matter how you spin it. Are you saying bad art can't exist? I'm saying that you can't call me out for stating an opinion but then state, "Oh, this art bad," when the only thing that it does is depict an anthro character. You can't lecture me about subjective taste. You project your subjective taste. You can dislike furry art all you want, but you can't lecture people about subjective taste when at the same time stating your subjective taste as fact, calling a drawing bad, merely depicting an anthro character. Consider that there are other reasons that your art is bad other than it depicts an anthro character. I don't care that it depicts an anthro character. It's a degenerate depiction of one, and the way you drew it is not good. That's why I said it's visually unappealing.
Maybe if you wanted me to believe you that it's not hypocrisy, you should have used literally any other piece of art that isn't the best quality I'm capable of putting out, that isn't furry. That last part being key.
Your other art can either be seen as unappealing or straight up uncanny. Like, come on, if I somehow managed to beat you in art style because of elements such as more appealing color palettes, better silhouette communication, better anatomy, etc., then you clearly just need to suck it up and improve.
You being allowed to share subjective taste and say that I'm not allowed to is hypocrisy, and nothing you tell me is going to make me believe you. It's my opinion that the art style sucks, and it's your opinion to not like my art. Also, you do have the option to not visit my DeviantArt and not download any of my art to your computer. I don't particularly know why you keep going there.
One, because it's absolutely hilarious. Second of all, it's because you're implying that you can create a better art style compared to the developers at Innersloth, but you clearly show more incompetence than what the Innersloth staff show off.
I'm not suggesting that a game needs to have graphics on par with the Louvre, but at the same time, Undertale has a simplistic art style, but it's as charming as can be and reminds you of something that you see on the NES.
This can be applied to Among Us as well. Like I mentioned earlier, Among Us looks like a Flash game with the simplistic art style it has. People like that stuff. Just because it's not Undertale's art style doesn't mean it's ugly to look at. That's just your opinion.
Maybe you should keep that same energy. Furry art looks unappealing to you when it looks appealing to me. Among Us looks unappealing to me when you think it's charming. I really should not need to explain hypocrisy here.
This really isn't hypocrisy. Just because you state that it's an opinion doesn't mean it's reasonable. You've presented your opinions as more objective than subjective. Maybe instead you should have stated that Among Us wasn't your type of game instead of making this 20-minute cope session on why Among Us is going to cause 1894 by that one guy who robbed a pregnant woman or something. Also, why do we always keep going back to fucking furries all of a sudden? Like, does Down Prime Tier want to jerk off the Steeljaw Rule 34 or what?
You know what I mean? Like, dude, I want to jerk off! Fuck! I want to jerk off! Look at this!
As for music, well, what do we got here? We got serviceable, stock sounding tunes not worth mentioning. Let's move on.
Brr, but you mentioned them anyway. I don't care.
Oh wow, what a knee slapper, dude. So funny. You should really do stand-up comedy, Roadbreach. You got the whole squad laughing. On a serious note though, it's kinda crazy that you say the menu music in Among Us is just serviceable stock music. That's not worth mentioning. Did you know that the menu music is based on The Thing? You know, that really popular horror movie?
Yeah, I've heard of it. And I'm very certain that watching it would be an infinitely more fun experience than this pathetic video game homage. Which makes it even more funny that the actual Thing video game is pretty good. Kinda like this is a retarded concept for a multiplayer game. What's next? Multiplayer stealth? Yeah, good luck with that.
My brother in Christ! Games like Trouble in Terrorist Town did something extremely similar with a violent imposter, and it absolutely fucking worked. It's almost as if you were lazy to explain why the concept of a murder mystery type game mode was a bad idea. Like, bro, elaborate on your points more, please. Also, you realize multiplayer stealth has been attempted on numerous times, and has worked numerous times, right? Case in point, the spy from TF2, any perk in Call of Duty that makes you invisible to stuff like UAVs. A lot of games have stealth, and imposters work because they are capable of balancing the odds between opponents. So to act like these ideas won't work is stupid without elaborating why.
It makes a lot of sense they do something like that, especially with how the imposter is supposed to look and how the game is meant to be played. It's almost like you can't really put 2 and 2 together.
Or it could be that the music wasn't worth talking about, and comparing this to John Carpenter's The Thing is pretty insulting.
Then why did you mention the comparison of the music to begin with? Also, it's just a neat little tribute more than anything else. Just because something includes a reference into something you don't like, doesn't mean it's incomparable to the reference itself. I know you dislike Among Us, but at least give us valid criticism for once.
The controls are abysmal. Every time you make a slight move with the joystick, you always go sailing off and smacking your stupid face into a fucking wall. It feels like I'm going to plow through the damn wall of this stupid spaceship because I feel like I'm traveling at the speed of goddamn light.
You do know that different lobbies have different settings, right? By the way, those lobby settings are horrendous. Why is the kill cooldown almost a minute long and the movement speed is ×3? That's ridiculous. Regardless though, you can always start your own lobby and create your own settings. It's not that hard. You're complaining about a non-issue that you decided to stick with instead of going to a different lobby that has different settings.
Actually, no, it is an issue. People regurgitate the same talking point when I say walking around playing the same tiny selection of minigames ad nauseum isn't fun.
It's a social deduction game.
And you agree these settings are terrible. Okay then why the fuck are you able to change them in the first place? Running faster in this game isn't fun because of the claustrophobic level design, and a kill cooldown of longer than 30 to 40 seconds is too long. If the default settings were fine as they were, then why are they adjustable?
It's because they're simply options in a casual social deduction game. The keyword being casual. Among Us is literally a murder mystery sandbox where you can play around in and change the setting as you please. It gives us more options and therefore more replayability. Perhaps that is another reason why it's so popular to begin with. The more option a game has, the more replayability it will often have. I mean, how else are more moddable games like Minecraft or Gary's Mod so popular to begin with? That's right, having a ton of options within.
This isn't like look sensitivity, text size, or anything that would make it more comfortable for one person. This affects the whole lobby. If a feature makes the experience worse, then why take the time to design it in the first place?
What's wrong with having having both normal and wildcard modifiers in video games. You realize games like Team Fortress 2 possesses fan-made modes like times 10 mode, which has absurd modifiers, but are incredibly fun for certain niches of people. It doesn't even damage the casual or default experience to begin with, just like Among Us. You are complaining about a game having more options at this point, and while there is a thing such as having too many options, this clearly isn't the case in Among Us, as you can either be casual as you please, or you can be as batshit insane as you please. Even if it affects a whole lobby, the majority of players would be fine with it.
Do you want me to do my tasks, or do you want me to feel like I'm going to smack through the stupid wall of the spaceship?
Bro, if you're uncomfortable with the movement speed, just go to a different lobby.
No, don't have this feature in the first place. People want to drill it into my head that this is a social deduction game and not an action game. Then why does the game have features that make the experience worse? Slamming your face into a wall isn't fun. Halo Infinite has custom games where you can change the settings like movement speed, gravity, and infinite ammo. Even if it breaks the game, the maps were still designed around these features. It's an arena shooter where movement is key to survival, and the maps are very spacious. Among Us is a social deduction game where movement is a commute between different areas of the map that is claustrophobic. These customizable settings were clearly not meant for this game, and thus should not be in it.
The entire reason why Among Us's maps are even claustrophobic to begin with is because Innersloth intended the Imposter to get the chance to be able to take out crewmates a lot easier within more confined spaces. If the game was more open, then both the tension of getting killed and the difficulty of taking out crewmates or evading the Imposter would be worsened. But even then, there's maps out there with like open confined spaces anyway, and they still work to begin with. The options, again, were meant to be a fun customizability of servers, even with more absurd settings just to add a spicy twist.
Or make your own. It's not that difficult. Among Us lobbies fill up really quickly. They still do, to this day.
I'd rather traverse the sea of rust than make a lobby in this game.
Your video makes me feel like Ironhide getting shot in the back by Sentinel Prime's rust cannon.
Get back! What have you done? I hereby discharge you from duty.
But that's only the role of the crewmates. What about the Imposter? I don't know. In every match I participated in, I was a crewmate. But I'm not going to keep playing until I get randomly assigned the role of the Imposter, because f*** off.
So instead of giving the game an actual fair chance, you decided to just denigrate it even further because you never cared to play as the Imposter. This is pretty much a completely unfair review at this point, because he's missing out like half of the game if he doesn't care enough to play more, and potentially become the Imposter. And I personally think that playing as the Imposter is the most fun you could ever have while playing Among Us, especially if you're playing with friends.
Yeah, maybe because the same shit minigames over and over again, some of which I could find in a paper or activity book, wasn't worth the minuscule chance that I could possibly get the Imposter role. If 90% of the time I try this game is just tedious busy work, then I'm not going to be encouraged to keep slogging through it for that tiny possibility that I may get to do the one fun thing that this game has in it. Life is short, too short to slog through self-inflicted tedium.
Dude, I know you value your time. Hell, I even value my time a shit ton too. But for fuck's sake, you're in your 20s. You have plenty of time to go through the process of being picked as the Imposter. Don't act like being chosen as the Imposter is just as rare as getting something very valuable in a CSGO loot box. Heck, you can even add more Imposters as an option in your lobby, which increases your chance of becoming the Imposter. Also, it's not just the busy work for the crewmates, as you actually have to evade being killed by the Imposter too, right?
No, that just means that the Imposter you're playing against is a bad Imposter. Normally, when a match ends that quickly in Among Us, that means the Imposter made a mistake right in the beginning and they couldn't make a proper alibi. Then again, there's no need for them to even make an alibi. You're playing in public lobbies, which are infamous for getting random people voted off if you happen to stumble upon the wrong people. It's also much harder to use the chat on mobile than it is on PC, which is why it's most preferred for me to play this on PC. Also, people getting good at Among Us is not a problem in the game. Crewmates are not exclusively the smarter players. The Imposters can be really good too if they play their cards right. Sabotage the area to distract crewmates, hide the bodies, come up with an alibi, and you can easily win as the Imposter. You wouldn't even know how to properly play the Imposter anyways because you self-admittedly didn't care enough to play as the Imposter for this review.
Maybe if the minigames were better, then I might be inclined to do that.
Even then, the minigame's purpose was to make sure that the crewmates would win, because if all crewmates finish their minigames, then the crewmates end up winning. There's numerous minigames per crewmate for a reason, which is why it's much better than simply walking around and waiting for a timer to finish, because at that point you'd basically have a strategy that devolves into a horde of crewmates and end up giving out an unfair disadvantage towards the imposter.
You can tell me it's a murder mystery all you want, but it doesn't change the fact that most of the game is spent on unimpressive minigames that I need to convince myself to slog through to play the only good part of the game. I know that games will be repetitive if they stick to one genre, but the game needs to find a way to break up the monotony, which Among Us will rarely do if you play public lobbies.
Most of the time, people will prefer to play in lobbies with their friends and not public lobbies, which is why Among Us is popular to begin with.
And the structure of the game doesn't allow for much longevity in the long run. The game's structure is just fundamentally flawed.
How is it fundamentally flawed? It's a social deduction game. Social deduction games can be really fun when playing with friends. If Among Us is flawed because of that, then so are games like Werewolf and Town of Salem. It sounds more like Among Us isn't your type of game, mostly because you're stupid and can't pick up on social cues, which was evident, by the way, because we recently played Among Us with him a few weeks ago, but that's besides the point. We're talking about his review, not the recent playthroughs we had with him.
I'm sure any shit game can be more fun with friends, because you can all commiserate with how shit the game is. But games like Concord, Anthem, and Crucible are either no longer with us, or have no online functionality because they were either repetitive or poorly designed, with Suicide Squad not being far behind. And yet, this piece of shit is still with us. Because...
You know who else likes to stuff themselves with My mom! My mom! My mom! My mom! My mom! My mom! My mom!
My brother in Christ! Did you just compare Among Us to freaking Concord and Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League? Games that are completely different to Among Us in terms of quality and genre? You realize Among Us was made by a smaller developer team compared to those slopfest, right? Oh wait, you probably think Concord is better than Among Us because your DeviantArt character designs are like them, but hey, who am I to judge, right? I'm not the one who lacks basic ability to criticize games and lacks the ability to have good-looking art.
If the game did something like switch up the minigames every round and or added new ones to make the variety better, then I wouldn't be so miserable playing it.
There's literally different mini-games and different maps in Among Us. A map like the Skeld compared to Mirror HQ has different tasks, in which contextually they all have to make sense within the context of the maps themselves. The entire point of the mini-games is to intentionally raise suspense and give the imposter a chance to assassinate the crewmates. While admittedly it would be nice to have more mini-games per location, it's kind of a hard task to do when it comes to making them contextually make sense around the map.
And I don't think I need to be Shockwave in order to find playing the same thing over and over again with the subtext of a murder mystery to be an unenjoyable experience.
My brother in Christ. Did you seriously state that people don't have to be Shockwave to see Among Us as boring? Like, dude, people are allowed to see Among Us as boring, but here you are trying to convey your grieved, spiteful experiences as pure fact. Ironically enough, Shockwave, you see your statement as, like, illogical. But hey, you have the intelligence of G1 Grimlock and the competence of G1 Starscream combined, so it's illogical to expect intelligence from Furry Carman, the Jarm Deer fucker.
The reason why I like Splatoon 2 over Among Us is because that game actually provides a little bit of a challenge.
Again, what is with these comparisons? First Club Penguin, now Splatoon? Splatoon's not even close to the same category of game as Among Us. And yes, Among Us can be challenging. If the imposter ends up being really good, that is the challenge. Figuring out who it is and surviving.
Yeah, good luck finding a smart imposter in the fucking first place.
I mean, hey, if you want to out yourself as a shit imposter, then be my guest. At this point, I'm willing to believe that Bayverse Mudflask that over here would absolutely die if he played as a spy from TF2, or if he played a game mode like Prop Hunt.
I shouldn't need to gamble every time I jump into a multiplayer game for a fun time. Sure, any game can be impacted if you run into idiots online, but I've had far better odds having fun with other genres regardless of how smart my teammates might be. It's not imperative that the other people I play against are smart in games like COD, Crash Team Racing, or Fall Guys. It's another reason why I hate this game along with this genre.
First of all, Among Us is meant to be a party game, so it's ideal that you play with personal friends rather than randoms on public lobbies. Second of all, wouldn't it be that hard to state that Among Us is not your type of game instead of going on this 20-minute cope session on why Among Us is going to cause the Tower of Babel to collapse or something?
Like, my guy, you've already lost the debate if you're comparing Among Us to games like Splatoon.
Do cry me several oceans.
My brother in Christ! You're the one causing Noah's Ark to happen with the amount of cope tears I can taste on your snobby face. Like, Jesus Christ, you're making a whole ocean here. You're flooding the fucking earth.
At least Splatoon isn't useless when I play public lobbies.
My guy, Splatoon public lobbies aren't any better, especially considering they have competitive degeneracy involved. Also, this is another apples to oranges moment, considering that one is a social deduction game and another is a third-person shooter.
It provides constant stimulation, which is something that Among Us just doesn't do.
The stimulation in Among Us comes from the social deduction, which is the fundamental part of the game. If you don't get stimulation from that, then this game wasn't meant for you in the first place. Comparing this game to Splatoon is incredibly stupid, because Splatoon is not a social deduction game. It's a shooter where you have to conquer more territory than the other. So again, I don't know how you can make this comparison, except for the fact you're really dumb.
Or it could be the fact that the game will almost always be more fun due to the fact that I don't need to have my friends join in whenever I play it to have a good time. And has far more variables to keep the game interesting. Things like weapons, sub-weapons, new players shuffling into the game every round, and different gear that changes the stats you have. Among Us has only one of those things. It's not stupid to want some fucking variety.
I don't think I need to repeat myself on why this is such a stupid point. One is a social deduction game and another is a third-person shooter. Among Us has a ton of variables anyways, such as the server settings that change up your game, or the character customization that increasingly gets better the more they play.
In Splatoon 2, you're making sure that you have the most upward-facing surface area covered with your ink. In Among Us, you walk around and doing remedial tasks that are barely stimulating at all.
The minigames in Among Us are not supposed to be stimulating. That's something you have to do in the background, and is also a key factor that forces the imposter to do something. Because guess what? If the imposter doesn't kill everybody by the time everybody completes their tasks, the imposter loses. But the most stimulating part of Among Us is the social deduction aspect, where everyone has to figure out who the imposter is. And for the imposter, the stimulating part for that role is killing the crewmates and being good at it without getting ejected. Stop with this comparison to Splatoon. It's really stupid.
No, I'm not. You spend most of the game playing the same minigames every damn round. You can call it a background thing all you want, but it doesn't change the fact that it's most of what you do in the game, with the social deduction being a tiny portion of every round. Either make the best minigames ever made, or add some new ones, and change them every round.
This is just strawmanning the game at this point. Jesus. Minigames are the majority, but that's not all what you do. You can do stuff such as, report emergency meetings, intentionally scan your areas for clues for the imposter. For example, let's say you walk past a player and the next thing you see is like a dead corpse on the ground. Well, the logical solution is to report the body and explain your situation, in which you can have numerous other witnesses testify. If you don't like it, then state that the game isn't for you and not make a full-on cope session. Again, as well, there are numerous maps, so don't come at me saying that there's little to no minigame variety, especially considering that you only play this game for a few minutes before making this manifesto on how much you want to bomb Innersloth LLC's HQ or something.
In Splatoon 2, you have many different options to customize your playstyle. In Among Us, you don't get diddly for customizing your playstyle at all.
I mean, besides the roles that we got later down the line, there's not much you can really add to this type of game in terms of playstyle. It's literally a game of whodunit. What more do you want? This isn't a Call of Duty game, my guy.
I want more variety in the minigames, and I want Among Us fans to quit harassing people who use words that were just part of the dictionary, or having something that slightly looks like one of these ugly cunts you play as in this fucking dumpster fire.
That entire point about the Among Us community is irrelevant. Besides, the entire Among Us meme trend is nowhere to be seen and is easily ignorable. It seems that you're unable to separate the game from its fanbase. But hey, there's totally nothing coming up that's related to the fandom nonsense instead of actual relevant criticism, right?
Hopefully you understand where I'm coming from with these complaints and comparisons.
No, I don't think anybody knows where you're coming from, because your comparisons and complaints do not make sense.
Yet I'm the one who can't put two and two together?
Don't for a second tell me that Five Nights at Freddy's or Undertale have a bad fan base when Among Us fans will come out of the woodworks and randomly blurt out its name for no goddamn reason. Don't come to me and tell me that Five Nights at Freddy's is try-hard when Among Us doesn't try in the slightest.
You're comparing the Among Us community, a community that likes to spam Among Us when they see something that vaguely looks like a crewmate, to two different communities that are not only extremely degenerate, but are also notorious for having some of the most disgusting people within them, pedophiles included. You know that's why those communities get attacked so much, right? Because there are genuinely some disgusting people in those communities, and yet I haven't heard a single horrible person that's within the Among Us community.
Go fuck yourself. 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 Go fuck your No, seriously, go fuck yourself, Nier.
Wow, dude, mentioning legitimate problems in the community? That's bad, 1984-esque, horrific on the lines of the Holocaust, and so comically evil that I can feel myself in my evil wizard tower. But no, apparently people making an oversaturated meme is worse than literal pedophiles and zoophiles in the communities that have so many problems. Oh, and considering there's furry anthro characters too, we can't forget about the porn addiction problem as well.
Of all the things that I would have expected from you, I wouldn't have expected whataboutism of all things.
Bro, what whataboutism? There's literally so many recorded instances of degeneracy within the Undertale and FNAF community that's not even funny.
You try to paint it as pedophilia is just something that's accepted within either community, as if they aren't kicked out and ostracized the second they get found out.
Well, it's still a problem when the pedophilia still exists to begin with. Just because you have a drug-addicted hobo squatter kicked out of your house via police or the Second Amendment doesn't mean that squatting is not a problem elsewhere. Just because furries kick out zoophiles out of their community doesn't mean that the furry community doesn't have a zoophilia problem. It still exists. That's why people criticize these communities so much. It's because they're still technically in the community to begin with. It's just a stupid, degenerate, and illegal variation of the community itself.
Like a former fan game dev, Blackout, or former illustrator, Pinky Pills, both of whom have been kicked to the curb once people found out what they did. You are literally using the relative privitation fallacy here. Not only that, but I managed to find some pedophiles in Among Us just by searching it up on YouTube. Should we use the group fallacy here too?
For the love of God, I checked those videos and they were straight up stage and have little views on them. Now let's compare them to the videos on the Undertale and FNAF community and ooh, yeah, that's not good, that's not good, oh fuck.
No, because that's disingenuous. And it still doesn't change the fact that obnoxious people are still obnoxious. Any fandom can have shitty people in them.
Then maybe don't go on irrelevant rants on how the Among Us community is bad when there's clearly worse out there. And maybe instead criticize the game on what the developer's trying to do off its own merits. And maybe instead of going on a 20-minute cope session on how Among Us ruined your life and shot your non-existent wife, maybe you instead should say that the game isn't for you and just ignore all the Among Us memes to begin with. But hey, I think this guy and these Transformers cartoons have something in common. They make me want to claw my eyes out or even get a lobotomy.
So there, I explained why I hate this game in a much more thorough fashion and showed the dishonest arguments made throughout this video. Now you may be wondering why I decided to respond after 2 months. And to that, I say I decided to take some advice.
I do not plan on repeating myself when I tried giving you this piece of advice, Roadbreach. Grow a fucking spine.
Yeah, of course, taking a clip out of context is so nice. For actual context, this was a video by Netherless that showed that Roadbreach cannot take criticism when he got criticized for posting his god-awful, nearly pornographic furry art in some Discord servers. Especially considering that people gave him advice, but he just straight up dismisses said advice and spurgs out on my server on how Psycho server is toxic when the rules clearly state that furry not safe for work or anything bordering on that is not allowed. Look, if you want to post your shitty organic steeljaw not safe for work art, then go to a server with no minors and allow not safe for work art, not Psycho's server.
Don't go out of your way to harass people I talk about. Thanks for watching and gotta zoom.
Zooming where? To the Twin Towers? I was inspired by cars. Thank you for noticing.
Allah Akbar! Allah Akbar!
Anyways, this is the end of the video. Rid15 Sideswipe over here is unable to criticize shit. I mean, this is the same guy who spurged over someone having an opinion over someone calling the Transformers Devastation OST mid. But hey, if there's a saying that's relevant enough for this video, you either die a big country or live long enough to be the furry car man that 100% is going to dox my location and send his non-existent friend Barricade after me. And Shatter. And Dropkick. And Lockdown. And his autistic ding-ding Lego brick with Down syndrome. And